The sound of gunfire echoed across the training grounds as Sarah Martinez collapsed to her knees, sand grinding into her palms. For the 7th time that day, she had failed another combat drill. Her fellow recruits stood in formation, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and frustration. Some whispered behind her back, questioning whether a woman belonged in this elite program at all. But what they didn't know was that in less than 72 hours, this same woman they had written off would be holding the service weapon of the most decorated Navy SEAL commander in the unit's history. What they couldn't predict was that her failures would become the very foundation of an extraordinary transformation that would challenge everything the military thought they knew about strength, determination, and what it truly means to be a warrior. This is the story of how repeated failure became the pathway to unprecedented success, and how one commander's unconventional decision would change not just Sarah's life, but the entire culture of one of America's most elite fighting forces. Sometimes the greatest victories come from the deepest defeats, and sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the shadows of their own broken expectations. Sarah Martinez had always been different. Growing up in East Los Angeles, she was the daughter of a single mother who worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table. While other girls her age were focused on makeup and boys, Sarah spent her afternoons at the local boxing gym, learning to throw punches that could knock a grown man off his feet. Her mother, Maria, initially worried about her daughter's unusual interests, but she soon realized that Sarah's determination was something special. The military had always called to Sarah, not because of some romantic notion of glory or honor, but because she understood what it meant to fight for something bigger than yourself. She had watched her mother sacrifice everything for her family, and she wanted to serve her country with that same level of dedication. When she turned 18, she enlisted in the Navy without hesitation, despite the concerns of friends and family who questioned whether she was making the right choice. Basic training had been challenging, but Sarah thrived in the structured environment. She excelled in academics, scored high on physical fitness tests, and showed natural leadership qualities that impressed her instructors. Her superiors noticed her potential early on and recommended her for advanced training programs. That's how she found herself at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California, attempting to qualify for one of the most elite units in the American military. The Special Operations Forces selection process was designed to break people. It wasn't just about physical strength or mental toughness. It was about finding individuals who could perform under the most extreme conditions imaginable. The failure rate was astronomical, with less than 20% of candidates successfully completing the program. For women, the statistics were even more daunting, as the program had only recently opened to female candidates. From the moment Sarah arrived at the training facility, she knew she was facing an uphill battle. The other candidates were impressive. Former college athletes, military academy graduates, and seasoned veterans with years of combat experience. Many of them had been preparing for this opportunity their entire lives, training specifically for the physical and mental challenges they would face. Sarah, despite her background in boxing and her military service, felt like an outsider from day one. The training began before dawn each morning with grueling physical conditioning. The instructors pushed the candidates to their absolute limits, testing not just their strength and endurance, but their ability to function when their bodies wanted to quit. Sarah struggled with some of the exercises that seemed to come naturally to her male counterparts. The rope climbing drills were particularly challenging for her, as her smaller frame made it difficult to generate the momentum needed to scale the thick ropes quickly. During the combat training scenarios, Sarah's struggles became even more apparent. The close-quarters combat drills required a level of aggressive intensity that didn't come naturally to her. While she was skilled at boxing, military combat was different. It wasn't about technique or finesse, it was about overwhelming your opponent through sheer force and determination. The instructors constantly criticized her approach, telling her she was thinking too much and not acting on instinct. The weapons training presented another set of challenges. Sarah was a decent marksman, but the advanced weapon systems used in special operations required a level of precision and familiarity that took years to develop. Her male counterparts, many of whom had grown up hunting or had extensive military experience, seemed to pick up the complex equipment intuitively. Sarah had to study twice as hard and practice twice as long just to maintain pace with the rest of the group. The psychological pressure was perhaps the most difficult aspect of the training. The instructors used stress techniques designed to break down the candidates' mental defenses and identify their weaknesses. They would single out individuals during exercises, shouting criticism, and creating scenarios where failure seemed inevitable. For Sarah, who had always relied on her intelligence and determination to overcome obstacles, this constant barrage of negative feedback was devastating. Her fellow candidates weren't always supportive either. While most of them were professional and respectful, There was an undercurrent of skepticism about whether women belonged in the program at all. Some made subtle comments about physical limitations, while others questioned whether she was really committed to the grueling lifestyle that special operations demanded. The isolation she felt was crushing, especially during the long hours of training, when exhaustion made every criticism feel like a personal attack. The breaking point came during a particularly challenging week of training exercises. The candidates were required to complete a series of combat scenarios that tested their ability to work as a team under extreme pressure. Sarah's team was assigned a mission that involved infiltrating a mock enemy compound and extracting a high-value target. The exercise was designed to be nearly impossible, with multiple variables and challenges that would force the team to adapt and overcome unexpected obstacles. From the beginning, nothing went according to plan. Sarah's team encountered resistance at every checkpoint, and their carefully planned approach quickly devolved into chaos. During the confusion, Sarah became separated from her teammates and found herself pinned down by enemy fire in a simulated urban warfare environment. The scenario was designed to test her ability to make quick decisions under pressure, but instead of thinking clearly, she froze. The instructors watching the exercise immediately recognized what was happening. They had seen it countless times before, the moment when a candidate's confidence completely shattered and they lost the ability to function effectively. Sarah remained in her defensive position for several critical minutes, unable to move forward or fall back to regroup with her team. By the time she finally took action, the mission had already failed, and her teammates were clearly frustrated with her performance. The debriefing session after the failed exercise was brutal. The lead instructor, a grizzled veteran with 20 years of special operations experience, didn't hold back in his criticism. He questioned Sarah's decision-making abilities, her situational awareness, and her fundamental understanding of combat tactics. His words cut deep, not because they were delivered with malice, but because Sarah knew that much of what he was saying was true. The failure of that mission marked the beginning of a downward spiral for Sarah. Over the following weeks, her performance continued to deteriorate. The confidence that had carried her through basic training and her early military career was completely shattered. She began second-guessing every decision, overthinking every scenario, and losing the instinctive reactions that successful special operations personnel needed to develop. Her fellow candidates began to distance themselves from her. In a program where teamwork was essential, being paired with someone who might compromise the mission was seen as a liability. Sarah found herself increasingly isolated, eating meals alone and spending her free time studying training manuals in a desperate attempt to improve her performance. The more she struggled, the more obvious it became that she was failing to meet the standards expected of special operations personnel. The instructors began to take notice of her declining performance as well. During individual counseling sessions, they expressed concern about her ability to complete the program successfully. They weren't being deliberately cruel, but they had a responsibility to maintain the high standards that made special operations forces effective. If a candidate couldn't perform during training exercises, there was no reason to believe they would be successful in real combat situations. As the weeks passed, Sarah's situation became increasingly desperate. She was failing drill after drill, unable to demonstrate the competencies that the program required. Her physical conditioning remained strong, but her mental state was deteriorating rapidly. She began to question whether she had made a terrible mistake in attempting to join such an elite unit. The dream that had motivated her to push through years of preparation was slipping away, and she didn't know how to stop it. The other candidates had largely written her off by this point. They saw her struggles during training exercises and concluded that she simply wasn't cut out for the demands of special operations. Some felt sorry for her, while others were frustrated that her presence was potentially compromising their own training experience. The instructors were similarly pessimistic about her chances, though they continued to push her through the exercises in the hope that she might somehow turn things around. Sarah's family back home had no idea how badly things were going. In her weekly phone calls with her mother, she tried to maintain an optimistic facade, describing the challenging but rewarding aspects of the training without revealing the extent of her struggles. She didn't want to worry her mother, and she certainly didn't want to admit that she might have bitten off more than she could chew. The stress of maintaining that facade was exhausting. Sarah was living in a constant state of anxiety, dreading each new day of training because she knew it would likely bring fresh humiliation and failure. She had always prided herself on being mentally tough, but the relentless pressure of the program was wearing down her psychological defenses. Sleep became elusive, and she found herself lying awake at night replaying her failures and trying to figure out what she was doing wrong. The training facility itself seemed to reflect her mental state. The grey concrete buildings and sterile training environments felt oppressive and unwelcoming. Even the beautiful California coastline that surrounded the base couldn't lift her spirits. Everything reminded her of how far she had fallen from her initial expectations and dreams. As Sarah faced another day of training exercises, she knew she was approaching a critical decision point. The instructors had made it clear that her performance needed to improve dramatically if she wanted to remain in the program. Her fellow candidates had largely given up on her, and she was beginning to give up on herself. The weapon that had once felt natural in her hands now felt foreign and uncomfortable, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. The woman who had once boxed grown men into submission now found herself unable to complete basic combat drills. The determined young recruit who had impressed her superiors with her leadership potential was now struggling to follow simple orders under pressure. Sarah Martinez was facing the possibility that her military career might be over before it truly began, and she had no idea how to prevent that devastating outcome from becoming reality. Commander James Harrison had been watching Sarah Martinez for weeks, though she had no idea she was under his particular scrutiny. As one of the most senior officers at the Naval Special Warfare Center, Harrison had seen thousands of candidates attempt to make it through the rigorous selection process. He possessed an almost supernatural ability to identify which recruits had what it took to succeed and which ones would ultimately wash out. His predictions were so accurate that other instructors often sought his opinion on borderline candidates. Harrison was not your typical Navy SEAL commander. While he certainly possessed the physical prowess and tactical expertise expected of someone in his position, he was also deeply thoughtful about the psychological aspects of warfare. He had earned multiple degrees in psychology and military science during his 25-year career, and he approached training from a more analytical perspective than many of his peers. This intellectual curiosity had led him to develop innovative training methods that had significantly improved success rates for certain types of candidates. Unlike the other instructors who were focused solely on Sarah's failures during training exercises, Harrison was observing something entirely different. He watched how she interacted with her equipment during downtime, noting the meticulous way she cleaned and maintained her weapons even after particularly discouraging days. He observed her studying habits, seeing how she remained in the library long after other candidates had given up for the evening. Most importantly, he noticed how she treated her fellow candidates who were also struggling, offering quiet encouragement and practical assistance even when she was barely hanging on herself. Harrison had developed a theory about certain types of candidates over his years of experience. He believed that some of the most promising special operations personnel didn't emerge from the ranks of natural athletes or obvious leaders. Instead, they came from individuals who had learned to overcome significant adversity through sheer determination and creative problem-solving. These candidates often struggled initially because they approached challenges differently than their more conventional counterparts, but once they found their groove, they could become exceptionally effective operators. Sarah's background had caught Harrison's attention from the moment she arrived at the training center. He had reviewed her file extensively and was impressed by her unconventional path to special operations. Her experience growing up in a challenging urban environment, combined with her boxing background and strong academic performance, suggested someone who understood both physical and mental toughness. The fact that she had volunteered for such a demanding program despite the obvious obstacles indicated a level of commitment that couldn't be taught. During one particular training exercise that Sarah had failed spectacularly, Harrison positioned himself where he could observe her behavior during the post-exercise debriefing. While other candidates either made excuses or simply accepted criticism passively, Sarah asked specific questions about her performance. She wanted to understand not just what she had done wrong, but why her approach had been ineffective. Her questions demonstrated a level of analytical thinking that impressed Harrison, even though her overall performance had been disappointing. Harrison began to investigate Sarah's background more thoroughly. He spoke with her previous commanding officers and discovered a pattern of steady improvement and strong leadership potential in less stressful environments. Her basic training instructors described her as someone who worked harder than anyone else in her unit and who consistently went out of her way to help struggling teammates. Her academic instructors praised her ability to grasp complex concepts quickly and apply them creatively to new situations. The more Harrison learned about Sarah, the more convinced he became that she was being failed by the training program rather than simply failing it herself. The current methodology was designed around candidates who responded well to high-stress, high-criticism environments. It worked excellently for individuals who thrived on competition and confrontation, but it could be devastating for people who processed information differently or who needed more time to develop confidence in new skills. Harrison decided to conduct an informal experiment. During a weapons training session where Sarah was once again struggling with a complex rifle system, he quietly observed her technique from a distance. He noticed that she was actually manipulating the weapon correctly most of the time, but her movements were hesitant and uncertain. When the instructors shouted corrections at her, she became even more tentative, second-guessing decisions that were initially sound. After the formal training session ended, Harrison approached Sarah privately. He didn't identify himself as anything other than another instructor and asked if she would mind staying for some additional weapons practice. Sarah, desperate for any opportunity to improve her performance, eagerly agreed. Harrison then did something that surprised her completely. He asked her to teach him her approach to weapons maintenance. The request caught Sarah off guard, but she responded enthusiastically. As she demonstrated her methodical approach to cleaning and inspecting equipment, Harrison was impressed by her attention to detail and systematic thinking. She had clearly developed comprehensive understanding of how the weapons functioned, even if she struggled to deploy them effectively under pressure. Her explanations were clear and thorough, indicating strong teaching abilities that weren't being utilized in the current training environment. Harrison then shifted the conversation to combat tactics, asking Sarah to explain her thinking during recent failed exercises. As she described her decision-making process, he realized that she was actually analyzing situations quite effectively. Her tactical understanding was sound, but she was being paralyzed by self-doubt and the fear of making mistakes. The constant criticism from instructors had created a psychological barrier that prevented her from acting on her generally good instincts. Over the following days, Harrison continued these informal mentoring sessions with Sarah. He never identified himself as a senior commander, presenting himself simply as an instructor who was interested in helping her improve. During these sessions, he began to see glimpses of the potential that had originally attracted her superior's attention. When she wasn't worried about being evaluated or criticized, Sarah demonstrated tactical creativity and leadership qualities that were impressive. Harrison's approach to coaching Sarah was completely different from the traditional special operations training methodology. Instead of breaking her down through criticism and stress, he focused on building her confidence through positive reinforcement and gradual skill development. He helped her identify her strengths and taught her how to leverage them in challenging situations. Most importantly, he showed her how to manage the psychological pressure that was undermining her performance. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was noticeable. During weapons training, Sarah began to move with more confidence when she knew Harrison was observing. Her accuracy improved and her manipulation of complex equipment became more fluid. She started speaking up more during tactical discussions, offering insights that demonstrated her growing understanding of special operations principles. Other instructors began to notice subtle improvements in her performance, though they attributed it to the natural learning process rather than any specific intervention. Harrison was careful not to show obvious favoritism towards Sarah, as this could have undermined her standing with other candidates and instructors. Instead, he focused on creating opportunities for her to demonstrate her capabilities in low-pressure situations. He arranged for her to participate in equipment demonstrations where her technical knowledge could shine, and he subtly encouraged other candidates to seek her assistance with maintenance and academic subjects where she excelled. The other candidates began to see Sarah in a different light as well. Her struggles during high-stress exercises were still obvious, but they also started to notice her other qualities. She was consistently helpful and supportive, never complaining about her own difficulties or making excuses for poor performance. Her dedication to preparation and study was inspiring to some of the candidates who were relying more on natural ability than hard work. Harrison also began to understand the institutional barriers that were working against Sarah's success. The training program had evolved over decades to select for certain types of personalities and skill sets. While this approach was generally effective, it was also excluding potentially valuable candidates who didn't fit the traditional mold. Sarah represented an opportunity to test whether alternative approaches to selection and training could identify hidden potential in unconventional candidates. As Harrison continued to work with Sarah privately, he developed a comprehensive understanding of her psychological profile. She was highly intelligent and analytically minded, but she also tended to internalize criticism more deeply than her male counterparts. The confrontational training environment that motivated some candidates was actually counterproductive for someone with her personality type. She needed encouragement and positive feedback to build the confidence necessary for effective performance under pressure. Harrison began to formulate a plan for how he might help Sarah succeed within the existing system. He couldn't simply override the evaluation process or lower standards, but he could create opportunities for her to demonstrate her capabilities in ways that the other instructors would find compelling. He needed to find a way to showcase her potential without making it obvious that he was providing special assistance. The plan he developed was both simple and elegant. Harrison would create a scenario where Sarah's unique strengths would be absolutely essential for mission success, forcing the other instructors and candidates to recognize her value to the team. He would structure the exercise in a way that her analytical thinking and technical expertise would be critical. while minimizing the impact of the high-pressure combat situations where she struggled. Harrison spent considerable time designing this special exercise, drawing on his years of experience to create a realistic scenario that would challenge all the candidates while giving Sarah an opportunity to excel. He knew he would only get one chance to change the trajectory of her training experience, so everything had to be executed perfectly. The stakes were higher than Sarah realized. Her entire military career hung in the balance. As Harrison finalized his plans, he reflected on the broader implications of what he was attempting. If he was successful in helping Sarah succeed, it might open doors for other unconventional candidates who had been overlooked by traditional selection processes. If he failed, it could reinforce existing biases and make it even more difficult for future candidates who didn't fit the standard mold. The day of the special exercise was approaching, and Harrison knew that everything he had observed about Sarah's potential was about to be tested in the most dramatic way possible. He had spent weeks building her confidence and helping her develop the skills she would need, but ultimately, success or failure would depend on her ability to rise to the occasion when it mattered most. Harrison had seen enough talented individuals destroyed by training programs that failed to recognize their potential. He was determined not to let that happen to Sarah Martinez, even if it meant taking significant professional risks to give her the opportunity she deserved. The commander who had devoted his career to identifying and developing elite warriors was about to make a decision that would test everything he believed about leadership, potential, and the true meaning of military excellence. The morning of Commander Harrison's specially designed exercise arrived with the kind of crisp California weather that made the Naval Special Warfare Center feel almost peaceful. Sarah had no idea that this day would be different from any other, though she had noticed that Harrison seemed more focused than usual during their private training sessions. She prepared for another day of potential humiliation, going through her morning routine with the mechanical precision that had become her survival mechanism. Harrison had spent the previous evening making final preparations for what he privately called Operation Second Chance. The exercise he had designed was unlike anything the candidates had experienced before. Instead of the typical high-intensity combat scenarios that favored physical aggression and split-second decision-making, this mission would require careful analysis, technical expertise, and the ability to solve complex problems under pressure. He had structured it specifically to showcase Sarah's strengths while still maintaining the rigorous standards expected of special operations training. The scenario Harrison presented to the candidates was based on a real-world situation he had encountered during his deployment in Afghanistan. A terrorist cell had taken hostages in a compound that was rigged with sophisticated explosive devices. The mission required the team to infiltrate the location, disable the security systems, neutralize the threats, and extract the hostages without triggering the explosives. Success would depend as much on technical knowledge and careful planning as on combat skills. Sarah listened to the briefing with growing interest. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she might actually have something valuable to contribute to a training exercise. The scenario required expertise in electronics, bomb disposal techniques, and tactical planning, areas where her studious approach to learning had given her significant knowledge. She began to formulate ideas for how the mission might be accomplished, though she kept her thoughts to herself rather than risk another public failure. Harrison had carefully selected the team composition for this exercise. Along with Sarah, he included some of the strongest candidates in the program, but he also made sure that none of them had extensive experience with the technical aspects of the mission. He wanted to create a situation where Sarah's knowledge would be essential, but he couldn't make it so obvious that the other instructors would question the validity of the exercise. The preparation phase began immediately after the briefing. The candidates were given access to detailed intelligence about the target compound, including floor plans, security system specifications, and information about the explosive devices. While most of her teammates focused on planning their assault routes and weapon loadouts, Sarah immersed herself in studying the technical documentation. She spent hours analyzing the security systems and developing strategies for disabling them without alerting the occupants. As the team developed their mission plan, Sarah found herself in an unusual position. Her teammates actually sought out her input on the technical aspects of the operation. For the first time since arriving at the training center, she felt like a valued contributor rather than a liability. Her confidence began to grow as she realized that her academic approach to learning had given her expertise that the other candidates lacked. The compound they would be infiltrating was actually a sophisticated training facility that Harrison had spent months preparing. Every detail had been carefully planned to create a realistic scenario that would challenge the candidates in ways they hadn't experienced before. The security systems were functional, the explosive devices were realistic training aids, and the role players acting as hostages and terrorists had been briefed on their parts. Harrison positioned himself in the command center, where he could observe the exercise without interfering. He had instructed the other evaluators to pay particular attention to how the team handled the technical challenges of the mission. He wanted them to see what Sarah was capable of when she was operating in an environment that played to her strengths rather than highlighting her weaknesses. The mission began before dawn, with the team approaching the compound under cover of darkness. Sarah carried specialized equipment for dealing with the security systems, and she felt more confident than she had in months. She had studied every aspect of the electronics they would encounter, and she had developed contingency plans for multiple scenarios. For the first time, she felt like she was prepared for what lay ahead. The first challenge came at the perimeter fence, which was equipped with motion sensors and cameras that would alert the occupants to any intrusion. While her teammates prepared to create a diversion, Sarah worked methodically to disable the surveillance systems. Her hands moved with steady precision as she accessed the control circuits, using techniques she had learned through countless hours of study. Within minutes, she had created a blind spot that allowed the team to advance undetected. The success of that first technical challenge had a profound impact on Sarah's confidence. She began to move with the kind of assurance that had been missing from her performance for weeks. Her teammates noticed the change immediately and started looking to her for guidance on technical matters. The dynamic of the team was shifting, with Sarah emerging as a crucial specialist rather than a weak link. As they approached the main building, the team encountered their first major obstacle. The entrance was protected by a sophisticated alarm system that would trigger the explosive devices if tampered with incorrectly. The other candidates looked at the complex array of wires and electronic components with obvious frustration. But Sarah stepped forward with quiet confidence. She had encountered similar systems during her academic studies and knew exactly what needed to be done. Working with deliberate care, she identified the main control circuits and began the process of bypassing the alarm system. The tension among her teammates was palpable as they watched her work, knowing that a single mistake could compromise the entire mission. But Sarah's movements were steady and sure, reflecting the countless hours she had spent preparing for exactly this type of challenge. When the alarm system went silent, indicating successful bypass, the relief among the team members was obvious. Sarah had just accomplished something that none of them could have done, and they knew it. The respect in their eyes was something she hadn't seen in months, and it felt better than any physical accomplishment she had achieved during training. The team moved into the building, with Sarah taking point on identifying and disabling additional security measures. Her technical expertise allowed them to move through the compound much more quickly than they would have been able to otherwise. She located hidden cameras, disabled motion detectors, and identified safe routes that avoided triggering any of the defensive systems. The mission's climax came when they reached the room where the hostages were being held. The terrorists had rigged the entire area with explosive devices that would detonate if the rescue attempt was detected. Sarah's job was to identify the trigger mechanisms and disable them before her teammates could move in to neutralize the threats and extract the hostages. The explosive setup was the most complex challenge Sarah had faced during the exercise. Multiple devices were interconnected with redundant trigger systems, creating a deadly maze of wires and circuits. One wrong move would result in simulated casualties that would mean automatic failure for the entire mission. Sarah took a deep breath and applied everything she had learned about bomb disposal and electronic systems. Working under intense pressure, Sarah systematically identified each component of the explosive network. She traced wire connections, located trigger mechanisms, and developed a sequence for disabling the devices that would minimize the risk of accidental detonation. Her teammates watched in fascination as she worked, realizing that they were witnessing a level of technical expertise that they had never seen before. The process took nearly 20 minutes, with Sarah working steadily through each component of the system. She explained her actions to her teammates as she worked, helping them understand the complexity of what she was accomplishing. When she finally announced that the devices had been successfully disabled, the entire team erupted in spontaneous applause. The successful completion of the technical challenges allowed the team to execute the final phase of the mission flawlessly. They were able to neutralize the simulated terrorists and extract the hostages without incident. The mission was completed in record time with no casualties, largely because of Sarah's ability to handle the technical aspects that would have stymied most other candidates. During the post-exercise debriefing, the other instructors were clearly impressed by the team's performance. They praised the innovative approach to the technical challenges and noted how effective coordination between team members had led to mission success. Sarah found herself being specifically commended for her expertise and leadership in handling the complex electronic systems. Commander Harrison watched the debriefing with satisfaction. knowing that his plan had worked exactly as intended. The other instructors were seeing Sarah's potential for the first time, and her teammates were treating her with a level of respect that had been missing throughout her training experience. The exercise had demonstrated that she possessed skills that were genuinely valuable to special operations, even if they weren't the traditional combat abilities that the program typically emphasized. The impact of the successful mission extended far beyond the immediate exercise. Sarah's confidence was completely transformed, and she began approaching all aspects of her training with renewed energy and determination. Her teammates started seeking her input on technical matters during other exercises, and the instructors began paying attention to her contributions in ways they hadn't before. More importantly, Sarah had finally found her place within the special operations community. She realized that her analytical approach to problem-solving and her dedication to technical mastery were assets rather than liabilities. She didn't need to be the strongest or the fastest candidate. She needed to be the one who could handle complex challenges that others couldn't manage. Harrison continued to observe Sarah's progress over the following days, noting how the success of the exercise had fundamentally changed her approach to training. She was still struggling with some of the physical challenges, but her confidence was growing steadily. She began to demonstrate leadership qualities during team exercises, and her performance in academic subjects became a model for other candidates. The transformation was so dramatic that other instructors began asking Harrison about his assessment of Sarah's potential. He was careful not to reveal the extent of his personal involvement in her development, but he made it clear that he believed she had significant value as a special operations candidate. His recommendations carried considerable weight within the training community, and his positive evaluation of Sarah's capabilities began to influence how others viewed her prospects. As the weeks following the exercise passed, Sarah continued to build on the confidence she had gained. She began to excel in areas where she had previously struggled, applying the same systematic approach that had made her successful with technical challenges to other aspects of special operations training. Her weapon handling improved dramatically, and her performance during combat scenarios became much more effective. The exercise that Harrison had designed as a last-ditch effort to save Sarah's military career had accomplished far more than he had hoped. It had not only demonstrated her value to the special operations community, but had also given her the confidence she needed to succeed in all aspects of her training. The woman who had been written off as a failure just weeks earlier was now emerging as one of the most promising candidates in the program. 3 weeks after the mission that had transformed Sarah's standing within the training program, Commander Harrison made a decision that would shock everyone at the Naval Special Warfare Center. The morning started like any other, with candidates gathering for their daily briefing on training exercises and academic sessions. Sarah had grown comfortable with her new role within the program, though she had no idea that her relationship with the mysterious instructor who had helped her was about to change in the most dramatic way possible. Harrison had been watching Sarah's continued progress with deep satisfaction. The confidence she had gained from the successful technical mission had carried over into every aspect of her training. Her combat performance was improving steadily, her academic scores were among the highest in the program, and she had emerged as an informal leader among candidates who were struggling with various aspects of the curriculum. She was demonstrating exactly the kind of growth and adaptability that Harrison had hoped to see. The decision Harrison was about to make violated numerous protocols and traditional practices within the special operations community. Personal weapons were sacred to military personnel, especially among elite units where individual equipment often meant the difference between life and death. For a commander to entrust his service weapon to a candidate was virtually unheard of, particularly one who had struggled as much as Sarah had during her early training. Harrison's service weapon was a custom Sig Sauer P-226 that had been with him for over 15 years. The pistol had seen action in multiple combat deployments and had been modified with specialized components that made it uniquely suited to his preferences and fighting style. More than just a tool, the weapon represented Harrison's identity as a special operations warrior and his commitment to excellence in everything he did. The morning briefing was proceeding normally when Harrison stepped forward to address the assembled candidates. Sarah noticed immediately that something was different about his demeanor. He was carrying himself with an even more formal bearing than usual, and there was an intensity in his expression that suggested something significant was about to happen. The other candidates sensed it too, and the room fell completely silent as he began to speak. Harrison started by discussing the nature of trust within special operations units. He explained how successful missions depended not just on individual competence, but on the absolute confidence that team members had in each other's abilities and commitment. He talked about how trust was earned through consistent performance under pressure, and demonstrated through actions rather than words. The candidates listened intently, wondering where this unexpected lecture was leading. Without warning, Harrison turned his attention directly to Sarah. He called her forward to stand in front of the assembled group, and she complied with obvious nervousness. She had no idea what was happening, but she sensed that it was something significant. The other candidates watched with curiosity and growing amazement as Harrison began to speak about Sarah's transformation over the previous weeks. Harrison described how Sarah had initially struggled with many aspects of the training program, something that was obvious to everyone present. But then he talked about her dedication to improvement, her willingness to help other candidates, and her exceptional performance during technical challenges. He praised her analytical thinking and her commitment to mastering every aspect of special operations doctrine, even areas that didn't come naturally to her. The speech continued for several minutes, with Harrison systematically dismantling the negative perceptions that had surrounded Sarah's candidacy. He talked about how real-world special operations required diverse skill sets and how the most effective teams included specialists who could handle challenges that pure combat warriors might struggle with. He emphasized that true strength came not from avoiding failure, but from learning and growing from setbacks. As Harrison spoke, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and embarrassment. She was grateful for the recognition, but she was also acutely aware that she was being singled out in front of candidates who had witnessed her many failures. She wondered if this public praise might actually damage her relationships with her teammates, who might resent the attention she was receiving. The climax of Harrison's speech came when he reached for his service weapon. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as he drew the pistol from its holster and held it up for everyone to see. He talked about the weapon's history, its significance to his military career, and what it represented in terms of trust and responsibility within the special operations community. The candidates were transfixed, understanding that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Harrison then turned to Sarah and explained that he was going to do something that he had never done before in his military career. He was going to entrust his personal service weapon to a candidate who had demonstrated the kind of character and potential that the special operations community needed. The symbolism of the gesture was unmistakable. He was publicly declaring his complete confidence in her abilities and her future as a special operations warrior. The moment when Harrison placed his service weapon in Sarah's hands was electric. The room was completely silent, with every person present understanding the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Sarah felt the weight of the weapon, both literally and figuratively, and she was overwhelmed by the trust that Harrison was placing in her. Her hands trembled slightly as she accepted the pistol, and tears began to form in her eyes. Harrison wasn't finished with his demonstration of confidence in Sarah. He announced that she would be carrying his weapon for the remainder of the training program, and that she would be responsible for its care and maintenance. He explained that this arrangement would serve as a constant reminder of the trust that had been placed in her and the expectations that came with that trust. The other candidates were stunned by this unprecedented arrangement. The immediate aftermath of Harrison's gesture was a whirlwind of emotions and reactions. Sarah was overwhelmed by the honor that had been bestowed upon her, but she was also terrified by the responsibility. She understood that carrying Harrison's weapon meant she would be held to an even higher standard than before, and that any failure on her part would reflect directly on his judgment and leadership. The other candidates had mixed reactions to what they had witnessed. Some were inspired by the dramatic demonstration of Harrison's confidence in Sarah, while others were confused or even resentful about the special treatment she was receiving. The instructors were equally divided, with some praising Harrison's leadership and others questioning whether he was showing inappropriate favoritism toward a struggling candidate. Harrison himself was fully aware of the controversy his actions might generate. He had made the decision knowing that it would be questioned by his superiors and potentially create problems for his own career. But he believed so strongly in Sarah's potential that he was willing to take those risks. He saw the gesture not as favoritism, but as the kind of bold leadership that special operations demanded. Over the following days, Sarah threw herself into proving worthy of the trust Harrison had placed in her. She treated his service weapon with reverence, spending extra time each day cleaning and maintaining it to ensure it remained in perfect condition. She studied its mechanics and customizations until she understood every detail of how it functioned. The weapon became a tangible reminder of the confidence someone had in her abilities. The psychological impact of carrying Harrison's weapon was profound. Sarah found herself approaching every training exercise with a new level of seriousness and determination. She felt like she was representing not just herself, but also the judgment and reputation of a commander she had come to respect deeply. The weapon served as a constant motivation to excel, and a reminder of how far she had come from her early struggles. Her performance during training exercises improved dramatically in the weeks following Harrison's gesture. The confidence boost from his public demonstration of trust, combined with the symbolic weight of carrying his weapon, helped her overcome many of the psychological barriers that had been holding her back. She began to excel in areas where she had previously struggled, and her overall performance reached levels that impressed even her harshest critics. The other candidates gradually came to understand the significance of what Harrison had done. They realized that his gesture represented more than just confidence in Sarah. It was a lesson about leadership, trust, and the importance of recognizing potential in unexpected places. Many of them began to treat Sarah with a new level of respect, understanding that she had earned Harrison's trust through her character and dedication, rather than through any special treatment. The instructors were initially skeptical about Harrison's unconventional approach, but they couldn't argue with the results they were seeing. Sarah's transformation was so dramatic that it forced them to reconsider their assumptions about effective training methods and candidate evaluation. Some began to adopt Harrison's more mentoring-oriented approach with other struggling candidates, leading to broader improvements in program outcomes. Harrison continued to monitor Sarah's progress closely, though he was careful not to provide any additional special treatment that might undermine the legitimacy of her achievements. He wanted her success to be attributable to her own efforts and abilities, rather than to any ongoing assistance from him. The weapon he had entrusted to her was both a symbol and a tool, representing his confidence while challenging her to prove herself worthy of that trust. As the training program entered its final phases, Sarah had transformed from one of the weakest candidates to one of the strongest. Her improvement was so remarkable that other military units began asking about the training methods being used at the Naval Special Warfare Center. Harrison's unconventional approach to developing potential was attracting attention throughout the special operations community. The weapon that had once belonged to Harrison now felt natural in Sarah's hands. She had not only maintained it perfectly, but had also proven herself capable of using it effectively during advanced combat training. The pistol had become an extension of her abilities, and she handled it with the kind of confidence and competence that marked her as a true special operations warrior. The trust that Harrison had placed in Sarah by giving her his service weapon had accomplished exactly what he had hoped. It had provided her with the confidence she needed to overcome her psychological barriers, demonstrated to others that she deserved respect and consideration, and created a powerful symbol of the transformation she had undergone. The gesture had changed not just Sarah's trajectory within the program, but it also established Harrison as a leader who was willing to take bold risks to develop exceptional talent. As Sarah prepared for the final evaluations that would determine whether she successfully completed the Special Operations program, she carried Harrison's weapon with a deep sense of responsibility and pride. The woman who had once been written off as a failure was now being held up as an example of what was possible when potential was properly recognized and nurtured. The commander's trust had become the foundation of her success, and she was determined to prove that his faith in her had been justified. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez stood at attention in the same briefing room where Commander Harrison had first placed his service weapon in her hands. But now everything was different. The woman who had once struggled to complete basic combat drills was about to graduate at the top of her class from one of the most elite military training programs in the world. The transformation was so complete that new candidates arriving at the facility could hardly believe the stories about her early struggles. The final evaluation period had been the most intense of Sarah's life. Every skill she had developed, every lesson she had learned, and every ounce of confidence she had built was tested through a series of comprehensive exercises that simulated real-world special operations missions. The evaluators pushed her to her absolute limits, looking for any sign of weakness or uncertainty that might indicate she wasn't ready for the responsibilities that lay ahead. Sarah had approached each evaluation with the same methodical preparation that had become her trademark. She studied every aspect of the scenario she would face, practiced her technical skills until they became second nature, and maintained Harrison's service weapon with the same devotion she had shown from the day he entrusted it to her. The weapon had become more than just a symbol. It was a tangible reminder of how much she had grown and how much was expected of her. Commander Harrison watched Sarah's final evaluations with a mixture of pride and satisfaction. The gamble he had taken months earlier had paid off beyond his wildest expectations. Not only had Sarah successfully completed the program, but she had done so in a way that validated his theories about alternative approaches to training and candidate development. Her success was being studied by military educators throughout the special operations community. The impact of Harrison's unconventional methods extended far beyond Sarah's individual achievement. Other instructors at the facility had begun adopting similar mentoring approaches with struggling candidates, leading to significant improvements in overall program success rates. The rigid, one-size-fits-all training methodology that had dominated special operations selection for decades was being questioned and reformed based on the lessons learned from Sarah's transformation. Sarah's fellow candidates had become some of her strongest supporters during the final phases of training. They had witnessed her journey from failure to excellence and understood that her success was the result of extraordinary dedication and personal growth. Many of them credited her example with helping them push through their own difficult periods during training. She had become an inspiration to others who were struggling with different aspects of the program. The weapons training that had once been Sarah's greatest weakness became one of her signature strengths. Harrison's pistol felt like an extension of her own body, and her accuracy and handling skills were among the best in the program. More importantly, she had developed an intuitive understanding of when and how to use weapons effectively that went far beyond simple marksmanship. She had become a complete warrior in every sense of the term. During her final combat exercise, Sarah was tasked with leading a team through a complex urban warfare scenario that required both technical expertise and tactical leadership. The mission was designed to test every skill she had developed throughout the program, from electronic warfare capabilities to close-quarters combat effectiveness. As she prepared for the exercise, Sarah felt a calm confidence that would have been unimaginable during her early weeks of training. The mission unfolded flawlessly under Sarah's leadership. She utilized her technical skills to disable enemy communications and surveillance systems, coordinated her team's movements with tactical precision, and personally engaged hostile targets with deadly accuracy using Harrison's weapon. Her performance was so exceptional that the evaluators described it as a textbook example of special operations excellence. The graduation ceremony was held on the same training grounds where Sarah had once collapsed in frustration and defeat. As she stood with her fellow candidates preparing to receive the recognition that would officially mark her as a special operations warrior, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. The failures that had once seemed devastating now appeared as essential steps in her development. Commander Harrison was selected to present Sarah with her graduation credentials, a choice that surprised no one who had witnessed their relationship throughout the training program. As he approached her during the ceremony, both of them were thinking about that pivotal moment when he had placed his weapon in her hands and changed the trajectory of her entire career. The trust he had shown had become the foundation of everything she had accomplished. When Harrison handed Sarah her official certification, he also returned something that had been hers to carry but had always remained his. The service weapon that had been her constant companion for months was ceremonially returned to its original owner, though both of them understood that the bond created by sharing it would last forever.
The weapon had served its purpose as a symbol of trust and potential, and now it could resume its place as Harrison's personal sidearm.
Sarah's mother, Maria, traveled from Los Angeles to attend the graduation ceremony. Seeing her daughter transformed into a confident special operations warrior was overwhelming for the woman who had worked 3 jobs to provide opportunities for her family. The pride in Maria's eyes was evident to everyone present, and she understood that her daughter had achieved something extraordinary through sheer determination and the support of exceptional mentors. The media attention surrounding Sarah's graduation was unprecedented for a special operations program that typically maintained strict secrecy about its activities. Military leaders recognized that her story represented something important about the evolution of special forces and the changing nature of modern warfare. She became a symbol of how the military was adapting to utilize diverse talents and perspectives in its most elite units. Sarah's assignment after graduation was to a special operations unit that specialized in technical warfare and electronic intelligence gathering. Her unique combination of analytical skills, technical expertise, and hard-won combat abilities made her ideally suited for missions that required both intellectual and physical capabilities. She would be joining a team that worked on some of the most sensitive and important operations in the military. Commander Harrison's career was also transformed by the success of his mentoring approach with Sarah. He was promoted to a position where he could implement his training philosophies on a broader scale throughout the special operations community. His methods for identifying and developing unconventional talent became standard practice at training facilities across the military, leading to significant improvements in both candidate success rates and mission effectiveness. The relationship between Sarah and Harrison evolved into a professional mentorship that continued long after her graduation. He remained available to provide guidance and support as she navigated the challenges of her special operations career, and she kept him informed about her missions and achievements. The trust that had been established between them became the foundation of a lasting professional relationship that benefited both of their careers. Sarah's success story became legendary within the special operations community. inspiring other candidates who were struggling with various aspects of training. Instructors began using her transformation as an example of what was possible when potential was properly recognized and nurtured. Her journey from failure to excellence became a case study that was taught at military academies and leadership schools throughout the country. The impact of Sarah's achievement extended beyond the military into broader conversations about leadership, potential, and the importance of giving people opportunities to succeed. Her story was featured in leadership development programs at major corporations, where executives learned about the value of recognizing hidden talent and the power of trust in developing exceptional performers. Years later, Sarah would return to the Naval Special Warfare Center as an instructor herself, bringing the same mentoring approach that Harrison had used with her to a new generation of candidates. She understood better than anyone how a single gesture of trust and confidence could transform someone's entire trajectory, and she was committed to providing that kind of support to others who were struggling to find their place in the special operations community. The weapon that Harrison had entrusted to Sarah during her training had long since been retired from active service, but it remained in his personal collection as a reminder of one of the most important decisions he had ever made as a leader. Whenever young officers asked him about effective mentoring and leadership development, he would tell them about the day he placed his service weapon in the hands of a struggling candidate and watched her transform into one of the finest special operations warriors he had ever known. Sarah's career continued to flourish as she took on increasingly challenging assignments and leadership roles within the special operations community. She never forgot the lessons she had learned during her difficult early training period, and she remained committed to helping others overcome their own obstacles and limitations. Her success had proven that excellence could emerge from the most unexpected places when potential was properly recognized and supported. The legacy of trust that began with Commander Harrison's unprecedented gesture continued to influence military training and leadership development for years to come. Sarah's transformation from a failing candidate to a distinguished special operations warrior became proof that traditional methods of evaluation and development might overlook exceptional talent that simply needed different approaches to flourish. The story of her journey reminded everyone in the military that sometimes the greatest victories come from having faith in people who haven't yet learned to have faith in themselves. As Sarah advanced through the ranks of the special operations community, she carried with her not just the technical skills and combat abilities she had developed during training, but also a deep understanding of how trust and mentorship could unlock human potential. The woman who had once been written off as unsuitable for elite military service had become one of its most effective leaders, proving that failure is often just the first step toward extraordinary success when the right support and opportunities are provided.